that we are just about ready. And I see that we have gone live. So hello all, and thank you so much for attending this Facebook Live student panel. I want to welcome all who are attending this Facebook Live event. I want to welcome all who are attending this Facebook Live event to, our Fulbright application panel with 4 current Fulbright students. My name is Olivia Gustafson, and I am a program officer for the Fulbright program for the Middle East and North Africa. I primarily work with our Fulbright alumni, but I've also worked with a lot of Fulbright students before. If anyone has any questions, please do put them in the comment section of the Facebook Live event, and we will make sure to get to your questions and comments as much as possible. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and as I introduce each Fulbrighter, I'm going to ask them to tell us their favorite thing about being a Fulbrighter. So I would like to introduce Balkis Boom, Ralph Nassef, Miriam Alhamadi, and Sarah Nima. So first up, I will introduce Balkis. Balkis is a second-year Fulbrighter from Morocco who is studying for an MED in International Education Policy and Management at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. So Balkis, could you tell us your favorite thing about being a Fulbrighter?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I think it's really hard to choose one thing about being a Fulbrighter, but if I had to, I think it's the community, how easy it is to be introduced to new people and new friends and make meaningful connections, whether it's professional or personal. Actually, fun fact, my roommate is a Fulbright a scholar as well from Pakistan. And I found her through an introduction by my college to all Fulbright students coming that year. So I would definitely choose making meaningful connections, meeting new people within the network and outside the network, because she introduced me to other people. I did the same. And it just creates this interactive network that keeps going on and on.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great point. All right, so next up, I am going to introduce Abd Ralph. And Ralph is a first-year Fulbrighter from Algeria who's studying for a Master of Business Administration at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. So Ralph, what is your favorite thing about being a Fulbrighter?
First of all, thank you so much, Olivia. I'm very happy to be here. Same as Balkis said, I think it's very hard to choose one thing, but if I have to choose, I would choose 3 things. The first thing is the opportunity to actually be in a classroom where there is so much diversity and where you have accessibility to professors, to research, and being able to just throw your ideas out and discuss them with people who can be like-minded, who can come from different backgrounds, and really see what are the boundaries of your ideas and trying to come up with meaningful outcomes. The second thing is really the community, as Balkis said. Since I'm here, it was so easy for me to connect with other Fulbrighters from around the world, especially on my LinkedIn. It's the easiest thing ever is to connect to people on LinkedIn, other Fulbrighters, and you would the community is really supportive, so you would get to connect with people and just exchange with them different experiences. I think I have more than 200 Fulbrighters on my LinkedIn, which is a huge network right now. And also finally getting to really know the culture, the US culture, having the opportunity to be part of the various cultural events and share new culture, but at the same time learning from the United States culture and trying to really form that kind of link and cultural bridge between different people. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. All right, next up, I am going to introduce Miriam Alhamadi. Miriam is a first-year Fulbrighter from the United Arab Emirates who is studying for an MA in International Studies at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington. So Miriam, could you tell us what your favorite thing about being a Fulbrighter is?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Olivia, for moderating this, and thank you to Amethyst for organizing this. So I was pretty excited to be part of the Fulbright program, and I think my favorite thing would probably be the kind of just like Belqis said, like the kind of community that it provides aside from the university community or the student body that I am a part of. So it's good to know that there's kind of this external community to which we all belong. And I would also say the emphasis on cultural exchange is something that I really like. So I would say, just like Abdurraouf said, engaging with people, and like I'm the only Emirati person that I've met. I mean, not met. I'm the only Emirati person kind of in all of my classes or in my cohort, and I've only met like one other person from the UAE. In my time in Seattle. And so it's pretty interesting to kind of, have to explain where I come from, my background and things like that to everyone else. And so that's been an interesting and fruitful experience.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, and so finally, I will introduce Sarah Nimat. So lastly, Sarah is a second-year Fulbrighter from Egypt who is studying for an MS in finance at the University of Tampa in Tampa, Florida. Sarah, what is your favorite thing about being a Fulbrighter?
It's hard really to say a few things, but if I can summarize it or if I can sum it up, it's basically the huge network that Fulbright offers. Like you meet a lot of very interesting people in different fields, and they're all like excellent people. So it always lets you level up. Like it always allows you to level up. And the second thing is the guidance that they offer. Like we have excellent program officers that guide you through every step of the way. It's easy to get overwhelmed when you're here for the first time in the States, but they make sure that you're aware of everything. You're aware of how to, for example, how to apply for like opportunities, internships, how to pay your taxes, how to enroll in the right programs that might fit your specific educational needs. So yeah, so to sum it up, it's the guidance and the very diverse network it offers.
Yeah, wonderful. And I know especially some of the trickier things like paying your taxes is probably really stressful. So, Amadis is always here to help for sure. All right. Well, then we're going to go ahead and get started. I do have some preliminary questions for all of you, but for those listening in on Facebook, like I said before, please feel free to leave your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them. So we want this to kind of be an opportunity for everyone watching to ask the questions they want. We don't know if we're going to get to everyone's questions, but I'm definitely going to try. All right. So, first up, if our esteemed panelists could tell us, why did you apply for the Fulbright program? Miriam, do you want to go ahead?
So I applied to the Fulbright program mainly because I wanted a unique experience. So when I was applying to universities, I had like some idea of where I wanted to go, the vague location that I wanted to be in, things like that. But then I applied to the Fulbright program, and its philosophy of kind of making you apply to universities like dispersed all across the US and, trying to increase exposure or, going to somewhere you might not regularly think of going, or it might not be the first place you'd think of going, that kind of thing was a sort of unique and exciting experience. And so I just wanted to, apply and see where that got me. And thankfully, it turned out well. But I would say, yeah, definitely the uniqueness aspect.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely getting to go someplace that you might not even thought about
Yeah,
before
for sure.
you applied. Yeah, for sure. Marcus, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I think applying after a professional experience, in my case, it can be a little harder, but for me, I worked in higher education for 5 years before applying for the Fulbright study grant. But my background is in marketing and trade. So my first master's was in that. And I was very convinced that I want to do corporate, I want to be in business or marketing. Then I worked in education for about 5 years. And it just made me change my mind. And I really wanted to be trained in my new professional field, or whatever that I became passionate about after my studies. International education, training in international education is not very developed in Morocco. It's something that is picking up through learning by doing. So people are in the professional sector getting trained everywhere, but there's not a specific master's or short-term program that I can enroll in. So I thought about Fulbright as something that can get me trained abroad so that I can go back and fill that gap that I felt in my training. So that was the reason why I applied for Fulbright.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think having an abroad experience and also being able to get a master's degree is so important for sure. All right, anyone else? Or we could move on to the next question. Ralph, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so not to repeat what Balqis and Mariam just said. So yes, having an educational experience here in the United States and kind of filling that kind of gap that you might have felt in your studies in your home country is a big factor why I personally applied to Fulbright. But at the same time, I'm having an MBA, and for me, business is the United States. The United States is the largest economy in the world. The United States has the most number of startups in the world. So the ecosystem and the knowledge here, I think it's far more mature than anywhere else in the world. And since I was already very involved in entrepreneurship back in Algeria, I used to lead student entrepreneurship movement when I was at university. I had my own startup in Algeria. So it really felt very natural to go after an MBA in the United States so I can learn from kind of the motherland of business and really bring that knowledge to my home country so I can contribute better in all the projects that I was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a great point as well. All right, so we're going to move on to the next question. And this one is more about the Fulbright application in more specifics. So what tips do you have for the Fulbright application generally? So what did you find helped you craft a successful Fulbright application? Ralph, would you like to go?
Yes. So this is a question a lot of people actually reached out to me and asked me for some tips. And I kind of have some tips, but they might seem very cheesy and very redundant because those are the kind of things that you might find whenever you go and type in tips to apply to something. But I really think that being authentic and being true is extremely important. This is the number one thing that you should put in mind whenever you're applying to anything, because every single person is different and we need to embrace that individualism that we have. if you go after like generic kind of narratives in your application, probably a lot of people have thought about the same things and they would say the same thing. And you want your application to stand out to whoever is reading the applications, because the person who's reviewing the application is reading probably like thousands of them. So he really needs to see something that is different. So you need to acknowledge your difference and then be true to yourself. Don't be afraid to be cheesy. This is probably the most controversial thing that I would say. Be as cheesy as you can. If you think that you're writing something and it's being cheesy, you're probably doing it right. Just keep on, being cheesy. If you want to say that you think that you will do the best project in the world, just show your passion, because this program is searching for people who are passionate, for leaders who are able to make impact. So you need to show that in your application. This is, I think, the most important thing that you can bear in mind whenever you're doing your application and writing your essays. And the second thing is always have a story. Find a story in your experience where you have impacted people or where you have done something significant, and try to highlight that story in your application. This is the type of things that would really make your application stand out, and eventually have you like progress in that application process. So I would say be true, be cheesy, and have a story.
Yeah, I like that. Being genuine and passionate about whatever it is that you want to study in the US is definitely important. Sarah, would you like to go next?
So I wanted to add to what Raouf said. It's a very excellent point, to be honest, because I personally applied this when I drafted my statement of purpose. I took my time to figure out what I wanted to display in there. And that's what I want to tell everyone, that take your time, try to understand your story, because it's easy when you're in the moment. You're like, yeah, I worked here and there and I'm interested in doing this and that, but there's much more depth to that. And you need to take your time to be able to like craft a statement of purpose that really reflects who you are. And don't be afraid to be vulnerable in that. That's totally fine. It still reflects your story. That's the most important element. And take your time in thinking, okay, so what do you want to do after this? Because that's the most important element in that statement of purpose, is that, okay, you're taking this grant for a purpose. So yeah, taking your time and figuring out who you are, I think that's the most important element throughout the application process. And trying to figure out who could be the right referrals that would help aid your application, or like boost your application. That's it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Especially your comment about referrals and recommendations is a really wonderful segue into our next question. So I'm going to hop into that one. So what is your advice on letters of recommendation, and how did you end up picking your recommenders? Balkis, would you like to go?
Yeah, I think really carefully choosing your referees is very important. Looking into your experience, because some of us freshly graduated from undergrad, so you still have that really close relationship to professors. You can have that as your primary referees. But if you have any kind of professional experience, and I would even include internships, your supervisor can be a very good source of testimony on how you work professionally in the workplace. Your professors, choose carefully choose the subject that is as relevant as possible to what you're applying for. A professor that you worked with closely, someone who can testify to your writing style or to your presentations that you've done before, something that is concrete. That's something that most US universities are looking for, not just an empty description of who you are, but evidence-based references. you can also, for my case, I had 2 professional referees and 1 academic. So 1 professor and 2 directors or supervisors. Because I was in a phase where my professional experience almost was as long as my post-secondary studies. So I wanted that to count for something. And also most of my interest in the field came from my professional experience. So it didn't make much sense for me to have 2 professors and 1 from the professional world. So play it by ear and also look at what you're applying for. If you're applying for an MBA and you just had some professional experience, you want that to count for something. You want that to appear in your application. So you just need to look into your experience and also what you're applying for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. And I know, especially for different fields of study, they're going to be looking out for different types of recommendations, or they're going to kind of appreciate recommendations from others versus, someone else. So, it is always a good idea to maybe do some research online as well into, for your field of study specifically, what do they appreciate more in recommendations and what tends to be more important. Miriam, you had your hand raised. Would you like to go?
Sure. Thank you so much. So just to echo and build upon what Belqis said, I think it's important to think about what it is that you want to do. So a lot of, sometimes people for their master's, they enter like a slightly different field of study than what their undergrad was. Maybe it's something related, but not exactly the same. So I would say maybe think of asking a professor who was not necessarily in your major exactly, but in a related field to kind of write a recommendation for you. Obviously, asking for recommendations is a delicate process. You have to ask the professors, you have to be prepared for them to maybe not have time for it, or to ask someone else. And so it is a delicate process, but if you can kind of choose referees who can speak to the areas or to the aspects of your portfolio that you want to highlight. So I kind of did the inverse of what Belqis did. I had 2 professors and 1 kind of professional reference. It was still an academic reference, but that person wasn't my professor. They were my principal investigator in this research project and so I had 2 professors who actually taught me, and then 1 principal investigator. And I thought that my recommenders could altogether provide a comprehensive picture of the areas in my academic journey and my professional journey that I wanted to stress the most. So obviously that is like an ideal case scenario, but if you can do that, if you can choose people who can kind of highlight the things you want to highlight, for lack of a better word, then that is, I think, a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Sarah, would you like to speak about your recommenders as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I supplied 3 recommendation letters. 2 are academic and 1 was professional. At the time, I had almost 4 years of experience. But what I wanted to highlight was my achievements, and that's what my recommenders did. They highlighted my achievements during my academic program, during my undergrad, and during at the time I took the CFA exam, so it's a professional certification, and I had an academic referral from that end. And he also highlighted my achievement during the exam. So it's really important to focus on what you achieved, and even if they sound like minor achievements, they are altogether, like, they should serve a bigger goal. So putting that in mind when drafting the recommendation letter definitely helps.
Yeah, for sure. You know, have them brag about you. If you know, you don't need to directly ask them that, but you know, kind of keep in mind
Yeah.
people who are proud of your achievements and aware of them for sure.
And you can remind them, like, even if they don't remember it, you can remind them, like, okay, during my time here, I did 1, 2, 3. My achievements were 1, 2, 3, and then they can be like, yeah, you did that, and it's fine because they're busy and they deal with a lot of like either other like employees or other students. So definitely when you mention what you've previously achieved, it definitely helps adding that to the recommendation letter.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, one thing that a couple of you touched upon as well is that it is going to take some time. So definitely give yourself some time to ask people, have other recommenders in mind if someone might not have the time to write a recommendation. You know, and that's just for grad school and everything in general, is to give people time to write those good letters of recommendation for you is important. All right, so we're going to go on to our next question. And so the next question is if you have any advice on research statements or personal essays. So I know that we touched on this a little bit under our general application tips, but if you have any specific tips on Fulbright essays and research statements, we would love to hear that. Yeah, Ralph, would you like to go ahead?
Yep. So for the personal statement, I would stand by what I already said. So always have a story. Do not be afraid to show your personality in your personal statement, because that's what the reviewer is looking for. So yeah, not to repeat what I said before. As for the research statement, here my advice would be to be specific, to really be specific about what kind of projects or what kind of research or things that you have been a part of, and how do they relate to your plans or the kind of degree that you want to have in the United States. It's also really important that you make a link between, once you get the degree in the United States, how does that going to help you when you are going to be back in your home country, and how does it going to help you achieve the projects or the kind of plans that you are envisioning. So be kind of specific. If you have some type of numbers to kind of support your arguments, do that. Include numbers, include specific news or information from the world, just to show that you're really aware and you master your subject and you know what you're talking about, and you have a very cohesive kind of course of action that links your past experiences with what you want to do in the United States, and then your future plans once you come back to your home country. So yeah, this is my advice.
Yeah, great advice, especially the part about, making sure that you emphasize what you're going to do when you go back home. How are you going to impact, not only yourself, but also your community. That's a really important part of Fulbright, right? So that's a great suggestion. Thank you. All right. Anyone else? That is totally fine. If no one else has anything to add about personal statements, no worries. I am going to take a quick detour from our pre-prepared questions. We did get a couple of audience questions, and especially, I know, Ralph, you must depart us at 1:30. So I just wanted to make sure to ask this, before you departed. So one of our commenters asked about, specifically in Algeria, about applying. But I think that this is applicable for a lot of countries where you do an undergraduate degree and then you do a master's degree pretty soon after. So when you apply for Fulbright, you have, an undergraduate degree and then also a master's degree. And their question was just about, if they're applying for another master's degree in the US, it was stated that their focus and their research should be different from the previous master's degree they already received. So you know, they're just asking about what exactly that means. And to me, that means that, you know, this second master's degree will allow you to learn something a little bit new, right? Something that you didn't know before, and branch out a little bit from what you had learned in your previous master's degree, and to kind of, you know, what are you going to do in this second master's degree, even if it is similar to your first master's degree, that is different, and really highlighting that and how that's going to impact you in the community. But Ralph, I don't know if you wanted to speak on that, or anyone else who might have encountered this as well.
Yes, I actually would like to address that. So it's very important that your choice of study in the United States to kind of build up on what you already have done in Algeria, for example. It cannot be the exact same master's. It can either be something that is maybe a bit more advanced, maybe a bit more specific, or you can just branch out to a different new thing. For me personally, my master's degree in Algeria was in hydraulics engineering, which is a completely different thing of what I'm doing right now. Just for this person who might be familiar with the Algerian educational system, I studied at the National Higher School for Hydraulics. So we have like different system from the universities in Algeria, but it's kind of the same thing. If you have a master's in Algeria, whether that was in engineering, law, or whatever, you have the chance to kind of branch out of something, as long as you have the type of experiences that kind of back your choice, or why do you want to change your branch. If you want to go to business, you kind of need to have some kind of projects or experiences that kind of explain why would you want to go into business. If you want to go to environmental science, for example, you should show, for example, some kind of activities or extra curriculum organization, some type of organization that you were involved with that address this kind of topics. And this is very important. I would like also to highlight that your application to the Fulbright program doesn't have to be centered around your educational and academic achievements. It can also be around things that are not necessarily related to your studies in the university. This is very important because, again, they are looking for leaders. They are looking for people that are able to impact their communities. So here my advice is you can pursue any kind of degree as long as you can back the reasoning on why you would want to go after that degree. And the second thing is, even if your studies are in a specific field, it is okay. You can apply with those kind of degrees that you had, but also show other activities. It's very important that you might have been involved in, and that would really improve your chances to be considered for Fulbright.
Yeah.
And with that, I would have to say that I would have to hop off.
Yes.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for this, Olivia. And I just would like to tell anyone who is watching us, they can reach out to me. And I'm sure this is the same thing for all the panelists here. You can find us on LinkedIn or whatever kind of social media, ask your questions, and we are very happy to answer them. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ralph. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Well, you know, so I just wanted to make sure to touch on that question before he departed, because it was specifically about Algeria, but you know, we can get back into our kind of other questions I had for you all. So I know that this is kind of probably one of the more difficult parts of the Fulbright application. So did you study for the GRE and TOEFL before you were nominated? And what was taking this like? Do you have any tips or advice about the GRE or the TOEFL specifically? All right, Miriam, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I actually didn't study for the GRE or the TOEFL before I had been nominated. I actually planned to do the GRE, but I hadn't gotten around to studying for it before I was nominated. And so I definitely did better on the TOEFL than the GRE, but I will say that I studied for the GRE more extensively than I studied for the TOEFL. And I think, so just some general words of advice, I think to focus on the program that you are applying to. So if it's like a more technical or science-based program, to maybe focus on studying for the math part a little more than you would study for the verbal part or for the writing element. So since my program is in international studies, I think it was important that I just practice writing, an essay like beforehand, just a simple essay. I just, sat down and just wrote an essay, or, just to do like the practice tests. And I think a lot of people compare the GRE to the SAT. So if you have done the SAT, I think the GRE, especially the math section, like it's a little, the math itself is a little simpler than the SAT, but the questions are trickier. So like it's just kind of knowing, just getting a GRE book, going through it, knowing like the tips and tricks, and like also focusing on your goals and your strengths. So I was always like a better writer than I was a test taker, so I focused on that. And yeah, that that was reflected later on in my results. So I think it just depends on, I think it's a very, it depends on what is it that you want to do, or what it is that you kind of want to emphasize to graduate schools.
Thank you. That's great advice. I know, Balkis, did you have something that you wanted to add as well?
I think so. It differs from one country to the other. I had to take the GRE and the TOEFL before getting nominated. It's one of the requirements to apply for Fulbright in Morocco. So one advice is to look into the requirements for your country. If you have to take it beforehand and it's part of your application package, you need to make sure the timeline is aligned with the available slots in your country to take the test. I know a lot of people are now using online, especially for TOEFL, online TOEFL taking tests, but you need also to take into account that not all American universities accept the online version. For the TOEFL, I think I did not study much. It's very important to look at the test structure. What are you expected to do, and how much time do you have for each section? Maybe if you're not used to writing very quickly, the writing part is about 30 minutes. So you need to get yourself used to writing quickly in English. One thing that you should take into account is that you might be in a noisy environment, because a lot of people are taking the test at the same time, and you have to speak and listen at the same time while everyone is talking. So that's something that caught me off guard, and I did not really prepare much for that. For the GRE, it's how long it is. You'll be sitting for 4 hours. You need to be prepared for that. If your back hurts, you need to take a brace with you, or food, snacks, whatever you need to keep you focused. I got the book. I prepared a little bit for it, because it's not something you want to just go to without much preparation. If you are not into math and calculus and all of that, it's not very developed. It's not something very hard, but if you have never studied any of this in English, it might be a little challenging for you. The wording, for example, I studied my whole life in French, so some of those words were not very familiar to me. So that's something you might want to focus on while prepping for tests. And just like any standardized test, it doesn't really tell who you are or what you are capable of. So I'm not a big advocate for standardized testing. I'm not a big fan of it, but there is a key to each test, which is familiarizing yourself with the structure, prepping the sections that you're not familiar with, and just focusing on time management.
Yeah, absolutely. I think organizing yourself for these exams is a huge part of preparing for the exam, is just making sure that you know what to expect, and organizing your time accordingly, and recognizing your strengths and weaknesses and what can you do to leverage those, right? So that's great advice. Thank you both. All right, so this one is a easy-ish question, but if you can remember, how early did you start your application, and what do you recommend for how early you should start your application? Bilquis, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. I think, again, you need first things first, you need to check the deadline. In Morocco, it's usually around May of each year for starting the next year. So you will apply in May, you will have the whole year to get your acceptances, etc., and you will go the following year in August. So from May to August, that's your application after being nominated. Beforehand, I would say 6 months at least before, because you have your tests to take, you have your recommendation letters, and I think the minute you decide to apply for Fulbright and you have May as a deadline, you need to start as early as December or November. So let's say you started in November or even October, asking for because you need to take into account that your referees might have a very full load of work or academic semester. So you want to time that very carefully. You start in October, you send all your requests for reference letters, then you schedule your tests, and the tests need to be, you need to have your results by that deadline when you're applying in May. So I would say at least 6 months if you are confident that you can work throughout that schedule. If you're not sure, I would say a year, because you need some time to think about it, to work slow. I was a full-time employee, so I had to plan it as early as possible, because I will take time from my job to in the weekends to do different things. So I would say that that's a reason. 6 months is a reasonable timeline. Less than that, maybe if you're a student and you're already with your professors on a daily basis, it's easy to get reference letters, it's easy to take time off and go take your tests. Maybe 4 months would be enough.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think the earlier the better, especially for applying to such a grant that it implies a big decision, right? Is like moving to another country and doing a master's degree, or if you're a joint supervision student, doing intense research. So it's a big decision, and you need a lot of time to think about it and how you're going to apply and prepare, for sure. Sarah, did I see your hand raised? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say everything Bilquis definitely said. Like 6 months is a very good timeline right before the application process begins in May, because if you're a full-time employee, it's really hard to take time off to prep for the standardized tests and reach out to referrals. So yeah, 6 months is a very reasonable timeline.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you both. And I know that the deadline for a lot of the countries is coming up. So, really make sure if you're planning on applying that you're really working hard on those applications if you haven't submitted them yet, for sure. And ask Ahmed East, either your Ahmed East field office or your commission or the embassy that you work with. Feel free to ask them questions at any time. There should be contact information on all of the websites, depending on what country you're from. So you should be able to reach out to someone and ask those pertinent application questions, for sure. All right. Now I will ask the last couple of questions, and then I'll check in again if we have any more questions from our viewers on Facebook, and then we can wrap up. So, I know we already touched on all of your favorite parts of being a Fulbrighter and what your favorite thing about being in Fulbright is. But, if you haven't thought about this as much, what are some of the other benefits of being a Fulbrighter, aside from what you already said?
I can jump in.
Yeah.
I think the opportunity of getting a fully funded degree in the US, something that a lot of people don't realize is how expensive and challenging it can be to be accepted to top universities in the US. I would take the example of my college. It has been ranked several years top college of education in the country. These are not things that can be easy to access when you are applying as an individual by yourself without the support of Fulbright. Studying in the US is very, very expensive. It's not something affordable. So having that fully funded aspect of the program, which is very rare in scholarships worldwide, and I worked in international education, so I'm aware more or less of what's happening out there in terms of scholarships for degree-seeking students. It takes out that effort of having to either work part-time or having to worry about the finances, which is an important thing for a healthy degree pursuing lifestyle. It can be very demanding. We're not used to the education system. So you come here, you need to get used to taking a small number of classes that are way much more demanding than any workload that you had before. Writing, doing research, being involved in labs or in activities on campus. So that's something you want to be 100% comfortable doing without having to worry about certain things. So I think that's a major thing in the Fulbright scholarship. And as a Fulbright student, you can also just the whole package. You have insurance, you also have flights from and back to your country. So that's overall something that I highly appreciate as a Fulbright scholar.
Yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful point, is that being a graduate student is already hard enough. And so, if you apply for the Fulbright program and you're nominated and you're offered a grant, it is a really wonderful way to kind of just focus on graduate school and focus on being a Fulbrighter and participating in your community without having to worry about all of the other stuff that I think might come with, being a graduate student. So it's hard enough, and Fulbright makes it easier for sure. All right. So Miriam or Sarah, do you have any other benefits to add, or it's okay if you don't? Okay, no worries. Oh, Miriam, would you like to go ahead?
Oh, so I do have something to add, but I don't know if this is specific to Fulbright or specific to being in the US, but I can just say it. So I do, just to build upon, again, what Bentley said, I think it's good to have a program, to be part of a program that expects you to just, study and be a part of your respective community. So I think that is a pretty valuable thing. And I think the support kind of provided by Amadis and by Fulbright in constantly communicating with the students, constantly checking up on the students, is also pretty valuable. Like it feels like there is someone to reach out to if anything goes wrong. Communicating with universities and navigating the bureaucracy can be a challenging thing. It can be a time-consuming thing. And so I think it's good to have Fulbright to sort of fall back on if if things are taking maybe longer than they should, or maybe if you're unsure about how to go about a specific bureaucratic process. So I think that is a valuable component. And also Fulbright does a pretty comprehensive overview before we come to the United States of, and they've explained kind of the elements of American life and of all the paperwork we kind of have to get done. So I think that kind of stuff can kind of slip by if you just want to focus on being a student. And I think it's good to have Fulbright to help in organizing that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right. So one last question for you all, and then I'll address a question that one of our commenters left, and then we can wrap up. So, this question is kind of for those who might be feeling a little bit on the fence about applying. So, was it scary for you to kind of move to the US for a couple years, and how have you dealt with homesickness, and, how have you kind of made the best of any sort of scary situation, moving here, if you felt like, at first you were really overwhelmed coming to the US? Miriam, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, so thank you for that question. I think, as with anything, moving to a new country for 2 years is a daunting experience, I think, for anyone, no matter how kind of global or cosmopolitan you are. Picking up your life and moving to a different country is an entirely different kind of situation. And so I think for me personally, so I don't know how qualified I am to talk about this, because I've been here for less than a year, because I'm a first year. I'm not a second year. But the way I've dealt with it, I think, is to kind of engage with those around me. So I think in my community in particular, in UW, but I'm sure this is true all across the US, I think there exists a kind of desire to have a conversation, to engage, to understand different perspectives, to engage, to exchange ideas. And so I think involving yourself in your community through conversation is a good way to kind of maybe mitigate any feelings of, any overwhelming feelings, because it helps you embed yourself in your community. So I just think, the way I've kind of dealt with it was just talking to more people, for lack of a better phrase. But it is, it can be a very nerve-wracking process. And I think it's important to be patient with yourself, and to, if an opportunity arises, to kind of step out of your comfort zone a little bit, to take that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. give yourself, a little time to settle in and to feel better and talk to people, connect with people, and take chances. I mean, that's what being a Fulbrighter is about, making connections with people and really connecting and sharing your knowledge with others, and and making international friendships. So that's a great point. All right. So one last thing I will say before we wrap up. I just received a 2-minute warning. So we did get a question specifically about PhD joint supervision applications. And I'm going to direct you to the Fulbright Commission in Egypt for those specific questions, because they'll be able to kind of help you with all of your questions about restrictions on applying and what exactly you need for joint supervision, specifically, because the requirements are quite different than if you were going to apply for a master's degree program in the US. So I will direct that commenter to our Fulbright Commission in Egypt. They're very helpful. So definitely feel free to reach out to them. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this Facebook Live. I think that's all the time we have for today. So if you're interested in applying to the Fulbright Foreign Student Program, please make sure to visit our website at amideast.org/Fulbright. On our website, you'll find all eligibility requirements per country, as well as helpful tips in the application link. So the deadlines might differ per country, but usually the first applications are due on May 1st. We'll also be hosting another Facebook Live event in a few weeks. So we hope that you'll join that as well. And I would also like just to thank our panelists so much for their time and their advice. It's really much appreciated. And I'm sure all of the viewers out there really appreciate the time that you took to kind of give your thoughts about the Fulbright program and about being a Fulbrighter. So thank you so much all, and I hope everyone has a good evening.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank you.
Thank you.